I'll never forget it. I found out about the shooting at the Pulse nightclub because, as queer Orlando folks, you follow Pulse on Facebook. And there was an odd post that said, "Everyone run." I was awake around 4 a.m., as women of a certain age are wont to do, and I saw it, and I knew something terrible had happened. Later that morning, we didn't know what to do, but it was Sunday, and we knew whatever we'd need to do, we needed to get to church as soon as possible. When we got there at 9 a.m., we'd heard the death count was 20 people, and we were horrified by that number. By the time the service started at 10:30, the number had been updated to 49. In the service, our minister had been texting with the LGBTQ community center in Orlando, which was overwhelmed and needed space. By 1 p.m. that afternoon, we had transformed all of the empty classrooms and meeting rooms into counseling rooms, drop-off rooms for water bottles, cooling stations for comfort pets, and meeting rooms for community organizers. But the moment that broke my heart came in the middle of the service. My phone rang, and it was my young adult son, who had just woken up to the news and was crying and terrified. "Were you there?" he screamed. "Are you okay?" I said, "Yeah, baby, we're okay. We weren't there last night. I'm okay. Take a deep breath. We're okay." Pulse was our club. Like the clubs Bonnie named here in Phoenix, they were the places where we could dance with our partners with abandon, laugh and flirt without worry, where the music had a strong beat. I've heard it said that if you don't understand how gay clubs are sanctuaries, then you've never been afraid to hold somebody's hand in public. Pulse was the happiest place in the city, in the happiest city in the world. Pulse was right downtown, unlike Parliament House, which was bigger, but it was further away. But we soon found out that the tragedy was even worse. It was Latin night at Pulse. The victims were mostly our brown siblings. They were at the intersection of multiple marginalized identities: Hispanic, gay, and oh so young. And it was the intersection of 3 different tragedies: racism, homophobia, and gun violence. The worst mass shooting in US history, a number that sadly would be topped within a year in Las Vegas. The next few weeks were a blur. We ended up with candles by our front door because we had so many candlelight vigils to go to. The sound of helicopters over our town was maddening on already frayed nerves. The details of what happened trickled out, and it seemed that Anderson Cooper was everywhere around town. But it was even more of a blur because I was in a big transition myself as well. Because on June 14th, the day after the Pulse shooting, it was my very first day with patients for my summer chaplaincy unit, one of the many steps one has to take in becoming a minister. Yes, I showed up on Monday morning and was the chaplain on call for Winter Park Hospital, a hospital in the Adventist hospital system run by Seventh-day Adventists, a very religious hospital system, a very conservative religious hospital system. The role of a chaplain is surreal in normal circumstances. A chaplain has a list of rooms to go to. You knock on the door, you open the door, and you just never know what you're going to find on the other side of that door. But in those first few days, they all had one thing in common. Every single person had the news on. So imagine the scenario. You're someone who lives in Orlando, Florida, in the hospital on the day after the Pulse massacre. As the details come out, as the world mourns, as the names, photos, and stories of the dead are released, and as the global spotlight is on Orlando, you may be questioning everything you've ever thought about LGBTQ people. And then knock, 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 here comes the chaplain. A chaplain in a conservative Christian hospital system who looks straight. Who better to talk through their questioning and judgment about gay people? Except I wasn't a conservative Christian. And in their wildest imagination, would they imagine I was gay? Heck, I hadn't even had the chance to come out to the other chaplains yet. It was my first day. But yet there I sat, listening to them tell me what the Bible said about homosexuality and asking me to help them think it through with them. And I did. It was my job. It was so hard. And then the summer got worse. I received feedback midway through my chaplaincy that I wasn't Christian enough. I wasn't Christian at all, and they already knew that when I started. And they said that the other chaplains felt like I was pushing them to accept my sexual orientation. And I swear all we talked about was, what did you do this weekend? Oh, Karen and I went to a soccer game. Really? Despite many conversations, making sure that my supervisor understood what was happening, that supervisor never stepped up and had my back. Basically, there was no room for me in that chaplaincy program with beliefs that I had and the sexual orientation I had. And as a person who had never really experienced discrimination, because I swear the red carpet was rolled out for me when I came out. It was a deeper wound in an already traumatic summer. I stopped going into the office with the other chaplains, and I just sat in the chapel and cried when I had a free minute. The summer of the Pulse massacre gave us a clear picture of how far we as a country and as a people had yet to go. We still had a long way to go. It was clear that Pulse was targeted because it was a gay nightclub. And since most of the victims were our young Latino siblings, we got a very clear picture of how strong homophobia was, not only in the general public, but especially in religious settings like the Catholic Church. So many of those young souls came out to their families in their deaths because they could not come out before. The funerals were complicated because some of the Catholic churches the families attended did not want to affirm the victim's sexual orientation. Funerals were full of religious protesters carrying signs that they deserved death because of their sexual orientation. And a story that still sits with me was of the young man whose father learned that he was gay from his death and would not collect his remains because he could not accept him. Indeed, there were at least 4 families that had at least one parent who would not accept that their child was gay when they found out that they had died at Pulse. That is something that only happens in the LGBTQ community. And the fact that most of the victims were Latino, half of them were Puerto Rican, was quickly overshadowed by the fact that they were gay, something that is still a sore spot for many in the Latino community in Orlando. When talking about the club, some mentioned that it was Latin night, but everyone mentioned that it was a gay club. The fact is that the world responded quickly in support of the LGBTQ community. I think for many people, it was a wake-up call that not everything was better. After all, there was gay marriage and there were gay characters on TV. Weren't we past that? No, obviously we weren't. Yes, it showed us how far we had yet to go, but it also showed us how far we had come. The world came out to show its support. There were vigils in cities around the world that millions attended, and politicians and religious leaders who changed their minds about homosexuality because of the tragedy. And people all across the country donating blood and compassionate reaching out. Our own UU congregation was flooded with cards and letters and pictures from children and beautiful prayer shawls, an act that touched me so much and inspired our own current prayer shawl ministry. It led to concrete legislation in Orlando and other cities, naming them as gay-friendly and pushing for anti-discrimination legislation. It pushed some denominations, namely the United Methodist Church, to reconcile with its harmful theology and exclusion. And sadly, many, many churches still have not. The fact that we as Unitarian Universalists are fully welcoming is still a surprise to many who left the religious world many years ago due to the devastating harm that churches inflicted on this community. For some of us, it gave us a way to look at the intersectionality, the intersection of oppressions, where you cannot separate one identity from another. It gave us another reason to note that our Black and brown siblings are affected by hate crimes more than white people. We know that the most dangerous identity to be is a Black trans woman. We recognize that not all oppression is the same. Sadly, there were 49 more examples of this after this day. We have come a long way, and we have a ways to go. But isn't that true of everything in our lives? For our reckoning with racism in the world, we've come a long way. We have a ways to go. For our rights, for our Indigenous folks fighting for autonomy over their land and our water, we've come a long way. We have a ways to go. For our evolution as moral and compassionate people, we've come a long way. We have a long way to go. For our environmentalism, reproductive rights, voting rights, equitable income rights, we've come a long way. We've got a long way to go. But let me tell you one more story about that summer. One night I was on call, meaning I was the only chaplain in the hospital overnight. Bill, his name has been changed, was in his late 60s and came in with chest pains. The nurses called me because they had checked him thoroughly out and he was physically fine, but he was clearly not okay to be discharged home. The nurse said to me, "There's nothing physically wrong with him, but yet he's hurting. We can't help him. We hope that you can." Gulp. Bill was distressed with a lot of things in his life. His wife's health, his brother-in-law, his bills, his brother-in-law, his concerns about his future, his brother-in-law. Obviously, there was something about his brother-in-law that was bothering him. I decided to dig there a little bit further. Eventually, it came out. I just learned that my brother-in-law is gay. I just don't understand. I'm trying to understand, but I just can't. I just think about it and I'm so disgusted. We talk more. I uncover what is actually quite common. He just can't understand how gay sex works, and he was very uncomfortable with it. We talk about that. We talk about humanity, how it is not just that. This whole time I've been holding his hand. His hand is actually a death grip on mine. Then he says, I mean, I've never even met anyone who is gay. I mean, I probably have, but I didn't know it. There's my opening. Do I say something? Do I not? I mean, this is not about me, but maybe, just maybe, this might help. Yes, Bill, you do know someone who's gay. You're holding her hand right now. He gasps. He suddenly plays back all of what he has said to us in conversation in his mind, and he gets very apologetic. I am so sorry. I hope I didn't offend. I mean, I didn't know. I know. Don't worry about it. I'm fine. I could have chosen not to say anything. I'm here to help. But then that opened up a whole new level of conversation about our humanity, our religious journeys, our paths that brought us together in that hospital room. And he had already seen me. He had already loved me. He had already experienced my humanity. And he learned in that to see me and what my sexual orientation was is just one other part of me. And he got to see me and his brother-in-law as a whole person. And just like that, one more heart was changed. We have come a long way. We have a long way to go. And each day that we live authentically as who we are can change the world. May we never forget the 49 who were lost, the city, the nation, and the world that mourned, and how we have been forever changed. There is more love somewhere. Indeed, there is. There must be.